Hey, okay, so we'll just we'll give it a couple of seconds, just wait out, see whether we can get a few people on board first before we kind of get churned into things properly. Welcome aboard, Ben. Good to have you here. Obviously, it's been a little while in the time kind of making. We've been kind of waiting to get you on here for a little while, but finally the stars have aligned. So yeah, we finally got you through and kind of got you going on. So welcome. Hey,
Thank
look,
you.
we might as well kind of get on with things and kind of crack into it. Start getting the show on the road. Obviously, people will be able to come through, look at this on the YouTube later, look at it on the Facebook and stuff like that. The links will be up there. So what we'll do is we'll go through a few introductions first. Now, you've obviously kind of pushed this out on your side where you are from at the moment, Arizona. So what I'll go through and do is introduce myself so that people know who I am, what I'm a little bit about. Our viewers here in New Zealand probably already do. And then I'll get into a bit of an intro of you. So to those of you who don't know me, hey, I'm Simon. I'm the founder, owner, director of PracMed New Zealand. First aid company, which delivers all sorts of training here in NZ, but primarily first aid. Founded in 2017 and basically teaching people real world skills based on the evidence-based medicine syllabus that we have kind of gained and learned over the last 20 plus years in various theatres, including theatres that I've worked in, and of course Ben has as well. So Ben, who are you? What are you about? Where are you from? What do you do, bro?
Hey, so yeah, I'm Ben. I'm with Greenfeet Medical. Started this company this year. Kind of wanted to pursue my own way to just help people with no-nonsense medicine. I think it's kind of started with the concept of when I even went on a medical site as a medical professional, I was like, man, this is really overwhelming. And I know a thing or two about medicine. I can't imagine how this would feel for someone that has just gotten into it or is just trying to get basics down. So my goal of starting my company was just to get like nothing I wouldn't use. I won't post or sell. And then just very basic, like simple, like you don't have much time maybe to watch a video. So a minute or 2 minutes to cover a simple topic and with just supplies and the basics. Because I think a lot of people will stray from the basics and want to get into what's sexy and what's, really not that important when it's always no one can be too good at the basics. And then you can go and move on from there to more efficient ways. But that's kind of why I started the company. I am based out of Arizona and I am a part-time PJ. And then I also do a few other contract gigs on the side. But right now this business and then my government work is kind of my focus.
Yeah, awesome. And I think you've gone through, a little bit of medicine, humble as ever. So, yeah, PJs, for those watching who don't understand what a PJ is, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that and just explain what a PJ is? I've had some experiences with you guys. I don't think it was you directly. I'm sure we would have remembered each other if it was. But the crews who have been through to pick up friends of mine, to pick up colleagues and so on, just absolutely incredible. So why don't you go ahead and let us know what is a PJ? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so a PJ is also known as a pararescueman. It's a part of the Air Force. They're within the special operations aspect. We are essentially the jack of all trades, master of none is kind of what people call us. We maintain proficiency as paramedics with some minor surgical skills. We do, high angle rescue with ropes. We do avalanche rescue. We do some, shooting and tactics work. We do military free fall, so parachute work, scuba diving, multiple types of scuba. We're all combat divers. And then on top of that, there's a myriad of other rescue skills. But the big thing we try to focus on is we're rescue specialists. So our goal is to gain access in austere and difficult environments and then stabilize that patient as best as possible and then get them out of there to the, bright lights and cold steel where the surgeons do the real saving, as we say. So.
Yeah, 100%. And at the end of the day, and I know how it is, coming from where I've come from, sliding down ropes, jumping out of helicopters, all that kind of stuff. It's very flashy and stuff. But at the end of the day, what people need to remember is that's only a method of insertion. That's how we get into the situation, get into the fight, whatever it may be. So, that's that. I mean, it is very cool though. Don't get me wrong. I mean, jumping out of a plane. That's pretty cool stuff. So yeah, very, very cool. So PJ, basically, you guys, that gives you an ability to do paramedicine and obviously a little bit beyond that as well, to go through and deploy into really rough spots or whatever else. And obviously, you have your kind of experience operationally outside of this, but we also, you support things obviously nationally as well, don't you?
Yeah, so we do. The nice thing is, even if there's like no war going on, which, I'm not a big war advocate either, but there's still work to be done. As a PJ, we get to do a lot of civil work. So whether it be hurricane response or natural disaster, there's, every year or so we'll send some guys out of an airplane to go jump in the ocean and grab some guys that are hurt on a ship until they can get to higher levels of care. So there's some work to be done. We do clinical rotations around the states. If you want to, keep your medicine boned up and you have a good medical director, it's pretty easy to do that.
Awesome. So basically, if somebody's drowning, 50 meters offshore, that's an excuse to jump out of the plane, right?
Yeah. Send us up. We'll be there in about an hour and a half, and then we'll come get you. Just keep your head out of the water.
Yeah, 110%, man. No, mate. Appropriation of resources, whatever, man. What's a resource? There's no price on life, right? Hey, team, basically, for those of you who have joined us in, thanks so much for tuning in. We just had a question pop up here from Marty Linton. Can we get a link to Ben's Facebook, etc.? So right now, right now, Ben doesn't operate on the book. He's only on the Instagram, and it also, I think Greenfeet has a website. So yeah, it's semi-functional at this point, but guys, we'll throw out all the links that you need there. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again. You definitely want to follow this account. There's some absolutely fantastic material on there already, and they'll only keep coming. No pressure, Ben. Yeah. So we'll definitely throw that up, okay, Marty. And for the rest of everybody who's just joined us or whatever else, guys, just go ahead, just ask questions as well. We'll try and address those as we go. Today, the content of what we're going to be talking about is going to be an after-action review. This is going to be a pretty heavy one. So viewer discretion or listener discretion is advised on that. We're going to be breaking down something that Ben went through, looking at some of the lessons learned from that, and also just go through and really dive deep into a quite an extraordinary kind of situation, which just had so many amazing learning points. So for sure, we'll get that up to you. So ask any questions you want. After we get done with that, the AAR, we're going to talk a little bit, or maybe kind of continuously as we go, about the chain of survival and obviously Ben's experience there. He's had some amazing kind of experiences with that, and it's just going to be a fantastic thing. So anyway, we better get into it. At the AAR, so I read about this. I saw this posted up on the social media, and I didn't realize it was you at the time. I was sitting there going, geez, that's crazy. And just to give the listeners out there a broad idea of what we're dealing with here, today we're going to be really focusing on wound packing. So this is a skill which has become quite kind of the topic in NZ recently. We've obviously been doing it since about 2017. We've been training people how to go through, when to, and how to go through and address obviously junctional trauma with associated massive bleeding, where we can go through and wound pack. But this particular breakdown today is a little bit different. And it's always something that I used to think about. So for those of you who do a lot of shooting out there or understand, profile of entrance and exit wounds from gunshots, you understand that the entrance wound is very, very small. The exit wound is generally a lot larger, but you can't always see deep inside to the actual wound cavity or deep inside to actually see what is actually bleeding. So to paint a little bit of a picture, Ben, why don't you go ahead? Obviously we're going to keep names, faces, all the rest of it, exact locations, all that kind of stuff. It's still fairly fresh. But why don't you go ahead and just let us know what was the general kind of the picture of what you were dealing with? Where were you kind of, and what were you doing? Obviously not hanging out, drinking bloody beers with your friends or anything like that. But why don't you go ahead and let us know what was actually going on that day?
Yeah, so this was back in 2019-ish in Afghanistan, the southern portion. So I was attached with the Army Special Forces team. We were kind of just making our way through a village at night, looking for, miscreants, as you want to say. And we found some. So we had the Afghans make entry into the courtyard. They got lit up So we had to deal with that whole situation. Got to really see some awesome work by the Army Special Forces guys I was able to attach with. They did this consummate professionals at that. So they did a lot of good work. We made the scene as safe as possible, but in the middle of this firefight, there was a Afghan commando. He got shot on the inside of his leg, and then it went through pretty high up into the inguinal space and then blew out the lateral sides and the outside, basically just right next to his butt cheek. Right there. So like right below the pelvis, right below the iliac crest, but there was a blown out portion about the size, I'd say about 2.5 inches in diameter. It kind of looked like a cone, the wound cavity. So something like this, like it looked big, but then it got smaller, obviously, as he went out. All the energy shooting out. It was a AK round, so 7.62, 39 is what did it. He was in that courtyard for probably 5 to 7 minutes until we could kind of deal with the threat. And then the Americans at unfortunately, his friends kind of just left him in there. So we had to go grab him out, pulled him out to a better location to actually do some treatment, not in the middle of a firefight. And while they were dealing with the rest of the threats, I started to get to work. And so this patient, he was still conscious, some vitals he had. I did have a weak radial when I got to him, and he was arterially bleeding from the entrance section, actually. It had nicked his femoral a little lower down. So first thing to do was, went straight to the bleeding, took I think it was a Gen 7 cat at the time, threw that high and tight. I remember even looking at it being like, wow, good training. I remember like training, this was kind of where I say you fall back on your training, you don't rise to any occasion. So everything that I did correctly was just because I had really awesome instructors and people with prior experience really helping me throughout this. So I remember looking at that wound and being like, man, I can get this tourniquet probably 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch higher into the leg. It doesn't seem like much, but when they did the imaging afterwards, they said it was occluded by about 1/4 inch. So that decision to go just a bit higher really did help with that arterial bleed. Finished that guy up, then I exposed the wound, so have some shears there. Cut open the pant leg and then saw that massive cavity. And so this is kind of where I was like, I'm going to get into some wound packing here. Because he was still breathing, and obviously M comes first for airway and respirations. But there's this nice he was still kind of screaming in pain. He has a tourniquet on now and a crushed bone. The entire head of his femur was shattered. So that tourniquet compressing on that. Went to work. I could barely get more than about 3 fingers really into that wound cavity, and I mean, in the moment, this was the wrong answer, to be perfectly honest, but I did pack about 3 to 4 rolls of gauze into that wound cavity. Just kept going and going and going without finding the source.
Yeah, real quick. So the initial decision to go through and apply the TQ to the leg, obviously, could you actually see the massive hemorrhage at that point? In terms of like you could actually see it through the the gunshot wound entrance, through the whatever fatigues he was wearing or whatever else. Was that ripped open or anything like that?
Yeah, I just basically saw the bullet hole and it was soaking that portion right there. So it wasn't like painfully obvious, to be perfectly honest. It was also nighttime, so there's that. But as I was doing my blood sweep, I did feel soaked clothing, and it was definitely more than just a laceration, right? So I was like, all right, got a little bit of light onto it and saw that that was a massive bleed. So.
And when we look at that region as well, anywhere around, upper leg, especially, femoral artery, iliac artery, anything like that, we're dealing with, I mean, you obviously saw the x-rays and obviously talked to the people who treated them in the next kind of levels of care afterwards. Was it complete, was the artery actually completely separated, or was it just was it nicked? What was the profile of injury on the actual vascular tissue?
They had told me it had been completely severed, as it was like that. It's like the perfect, the golden bullet almost.
Yeah, right. So just for the kind of listeners, viewers out there, just to put this in perspective, 5 to 7 minutes of bleeding from your high femoral artery or iliac artery, you're looking at around about 285 mils a minute, which is going through there, which is a considerable amount of blood. And I mean, just to even have a weak radial pulse, to be fair, it was pretty well. Yeah, I don't know what position he was in, lying there, holding his leg or whatever else. And just to kind of make sure we've got the right picture, that the head of the femur was actually separated, wasn't it? So
yeah, it's completely shattered.
Yeah, okay. Sweet. So I mean, that's just nightmare country in terms of that wound profile. And I mean, the region, everything about it is just a total nightmare. So once you cut the clothing away, that's when you kind of see the second cavitation. I think that's an awesome lesson learned as well. I mean, no matter how many times you go through this stuff in training, it's so easy to revert, especially under the pump in the red when there's dust fairies kicking up or whatever else. You can be going through and just, straight away apply the TQ or whatever else, and then think, oh, that's good. Let's start working on his airway or whatever else, or going through and addressing anything going on with regards to his chest or anything else like that. Doing another blood sweep, but without exposing it. And you've got to remember that bullet wounds go through and through. Don't always go through and through, but they can go through and through. And you've got to go hunting for that out. So it sounds like you did an absolutely fantastic job with that, exposing that side of his leg and seeing obviously a big hunk of steak kind of missing. So yeah, man.
yeah, get a fillet.
Okay, so that's pretty heavy stuff already. His buddies have left him behind, and I mean, look, I've seen this before as well, and certainly there's a lot to be said about going through and retrieving people and caring for the local nationals who are working alongside you and stuff like that. You can do your best and communicate your best and stuff like that, but sometimes these things just happen. So mad props to the boys who got him there and dragged his ass out. So that's really impressive. So we've obviously packed the wound now. At that stage, could you identify where the massive bleed was kind of coming from, or is that kind of how'd you do that, especially at night time? Could you identify it, see it? You're working under white light at this point?
I used red light for the first part, and then once I basically said, hey, his threat completely neutralized, we're kind of in I moved to a closed off courtyard area. So I basically said, hey, am I good to use white light on this guy? Asking the team leader, he's like, go ahead, just keep it low to the ground and turn it off when you're not using it. So I did intermittent white light use, just basically fighting for that light. Made a world of a difference for that wound pack, because I remember turning that light on and looking into it. It was pooling into the cavity, so there was a pool of blood. So it's not like, residual. There's still some blood there. Something was hit. So that's when I shoved the gauze in there, and I basically cleaned it out a little bit, try to look to see where that bleeding is coming from, but it was coming from pretty deep to this midline of the body almost. So at that point, so you have a question, was this packed with hemostatics? Yes, the first initial pack was hemostatics. So I did one roll of hemostatics and then 2 or 3 of standard gauze. It was a pretty big cavity. Once we finished that up, I put a chest seal over it, but just so we're clarifying this, that chest seal was not there for pressure. It was simply to hold the mound of gauze in place while I applied some sort of compression wrap over it. That is key.
Yeah, awesome. So we go through, we try and identify, and just for the viewers out there as well, to do wound packing, especially if you're having to commit to it, we don't wound pack a injury which is necessarily have to if it's a lot of musculoskeletal trauma but no vascular trauma, there's really no point. You're just going through it, cause a lot of pain to the person. I mean, look, you've got to make a judgment call. Things like large lacerations on the back or across the chest, stuff like that. You can fashion a piece of gauze to literally just sit in there. But what we're talking about here is gaining access into a cavity, which is literally pooling with blood, because that's one of the key components of going through and getting a successful wound packing job done. In fact, it is. You've got to identify that massive bleed going through and looking into that. So, yeah, it is. And it's so difficult as well. You can kind of go through train all you want. Then when it happens in real time, it's one of these things that it's interesting anyway. The first time you got to scoop it out. So were you using the gauze to plug it out, or were you using fingers to just go through and scoop the blood from that cavity?
Yeah, I used the backside of the gauze to just kind of soak and move it, and then it was like, I was like, man, I cannot really see that. So I tried to feel for it. It was still pretty deep. So then I was like, all right, just gonna pack this in here. Call it panic packing. Not the right move. It's a good lesson learned. Glad the patient didn't expire because of this decision. But yeah, we packed into it. At that point, I had it bandaged. It looked fairly controlled. It wasn't soaking through the gauze after I'd applied the chest seal and started wrapping it with the compression wrap. I was still kind of wary of pelvic involvement because it was right there near the iliac crest. So it was kind of hard to tell if the pelvis was actually damaged. And there's just a bunch of bone matter from the shattered femur just in the wound. So quite the thing to feel for the initial wound pack like that, at least that from the pelvis. So
yeah. No, 110%. I mean, this is a question we get asked as well quite a lot. What do we do if there's bone in there? And I mean, I've never had to do it with fragmentation like that. Absolutely incredible kind of AAR in that. At any stage, do you think, hey, maybe I need to kind of debride this from that bone and such, or would you just just send it?
I just did full send on that one, to be perfectly honest. I made sure it wasn't like any bone that I was packing deeper in, because as I went to feel, it was mostly tissue up towards the bleed, whereas it was the head of the femur really. So that was a little lower. It's like on the bottom portion of the wound, which was in a way kind of nice how that happened. So it's one of the only nice things about this wound profile. So the bone was kept to the lower portion where the bleeding was not coming from, and that's the point is when you're searching for the bleed, definitely, search towards the heart. And then if having a general knowledge of anatomy of where those arteries actually run is what was eventually, when we get later into it, able to actually stop that.
110%, man. I couldn't agree anymore. That's something that we focus very heavily, even on our most basic training packages, is basically, very, very basic anatomy and a little bit of physiology as well. And the likeness or the analogy that I use is very simple. If you don't understand how to go through and fix an engine or, under the car, there's no point lifting the hood. You're just wasting your time, you're guessing. So just the point that you just brought up now, absolutely fantastic, especially for you guys out there, junior medics, paramedics, etc., who maybe haven't done this, or anybody of any level. If you are searching, especially in low light, or if you can't see the wound for whatever reason, the main vessel bleed, then go through. You need to place your finger in and search inside of there. And it's not a frantic movement. Maybe we can do a video about this later on or whatever else, but it's not a frantic movement. It needs to be quite systematic with what you're doing. And you need to remember that if we don't identify that big bleed, then we're not going to actually achieve hemostasis, no matter what we're using. And that's a great question there, Paul. Was this packing with hemostatics? Because, I mean, every single time, or every time that I've done it, once was improvised using what is now known as I think it's still known as a combine dressing. And that was just random. That was random. That was very, very random. We can probably talk about that as an AR some stage. It's not cool though. I wasn't working with a special forces team. I was just
it doesn't have to be cool like that.
It's on the piss. So basically, we were treating somebody who went through a window. It is what it is. So it's one of these things that we can kind of go through and talk about. But it doesn't matter what you're using, what magical fairy dust is impregnated into your gauze. It's all about that technique and getting that accuracy going. That's something that I found in the subsequent 2 jobs or 2 times I've had to do this. So why don't we talk about now, what happened next? So obviously going through, probably hoping and praying that you've got the initial wound pack under control. And honestly, man, that super humble of you again. It's really easy to kind of modify the story to kind of suit the narrative or whatever else. But I think this is very important from a learning perspective, is that it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, things can go a little pear-shaped and you can get consumed by the situation. And for you to go through and say that you're panic packing, man, I think, I'd be completely lying if I said that I hadn't been in the red or overcome by thing. And I think that is such an interesting and such a very, very important learning thing. It's not that you have a limit or if you reach a limit, it's what you do when you actually reach that limit. What do you actually do? Recognize it instead of just trying to guess your way through and bullshit, because that's never ever going to get anywhere. So, okay, so we've got the initial wound pack going. What's your priority next, man?
Yeah, so I finished the blood sweep. That's been like, a minute and a half at least, maybe even 2. It's hard to tell. But finished the sweep. He had looked like a graze to the elbow. No arterial bleeding, but there was a little chunk missing there. So just kind of ignored that. Kept going. Put a fentanyl lozenge into his mouth. Just taped it to his finger. So if he passed out, it pulls out. Hopefully, he was in a fair bit of pain at that point. I was wound packing and tourniquet with no pain meds. He handled it like a champ, though. He wasn't actually screaming, just moaning in pain, pretty loud, but as to be expected. So after I got the massive hemorrhage done, he was looked in the airway real quick. It was patent. His respirations were rapid. That's all I really got for that. Wasn't like sitting there like looking at my watch and like, oh, we're good here. So my next priority at that point was to get access and get him some pain meds, but more importantly, whole blood. So at this point, you do have to start managing the helmet fire because we're in a tick, so we're in a little bit of a firefight. I don't want to jump on the radio while the team leaders, working to engage and remove that threat. That's priority number one. But then when I did find a gap, I was able to like radio. We had blood set with the 18 Delta, and so I had him bring blood to my position. So he came on down, and as he got the blood, I was getting an IV established, basically pushed TXA, ketamine, flush between, and gave him that. The exact dose, I have to look at my AAR for the ketamine, but it was, I think I started with 50 to 100 IV. So a pretty heavy dose at the time for the protocol. So now the protocol is a little higher. So got him at least snowed a little bit there, and the TXA on board, the 1 gram, and then we followed. Back then it was 1 gram weight, and then 1 gram. Now it's just 2 grams slow push for us. But got that stuff on board. I remember securing the IV as just a standard like Tegaderm, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But got that established. I had the 18 Delta. I was like, hey, I was just being honest. Like, I'm not sure about that wound pack. I don't feel good about it. Do you want to double check my work while I, start getting this blood and stuff hung up? And so as I was doing that, he saw that it was starting to soak through a little bit. So he ripped out the gauze, repacked it with his own gauze. So now we're at roughly 9 rolls of gauze into this thing. And he did an ACE wrap over it. So compression bandage to get that going. At that point, I had the blood hung. I was checking some basic vitals, and he no longer had a radial. And then the brachial was I barely could feel it, if at all. So he was basically going to carotid only at that point. So it started to decompensate a bit. So we're getting blood on board. I remember looking at that blood, and I'm about to go put it in the port. And this is why I now use chest seals as my IV securing device for field work, not in the hospital. That'd be ridiculous. Realistic time and place. But I use chest seals now because he just grabbed that catheter and yanked it 3/4 of the way out. And I was like, that's no longer good to go. I don't trust that at all. So had to go IO on him at that point. The 18 Delta handed me his fast IO. And this is another hit on me for this one, as I had not been familiarized with the fast IO for a little bit of time after that. So it was still in the original packaging. So I was trying to fight that. Eventually I just put it in my dump pouch and pulled out my own sternal IO, which is a Talon, similar. Just dropped that in the sternum, and then the blood was on board in about 4 minutes through a sternal IO, which is pretty quick.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there real quick. So those of you who are probably well versed with med probably understand exactly what Benji's saying. Just to clarify a few of the acronyms, and this is something I always get pulled up for. So I just want to jump in there, whining a little bit. TIC or TIC, troops in contact. So obviously this is still a hot environment at this point, and that means that medicine is not going to be the priority. And this falls in line with any kind of level of care or any kind of care provider. The first thing you got to do is manage the security, manage the threat, and manage the danger. There's no point in continuing. If you sit there and kind of obviously just focus all your skills in on that, obviously that casualty or that patient, you're just going to end up getting zipped up yourself. And that's another one which was used before. Zipped up means you're getting shot. So the zipping noise, crack thump, or that cracking zipping noise that you hear, that's never a good thing if you're at the receiving end there. Just on top of that, the drugs that he's talking about there, if you understand what he's talking about, then you're probably good to go. TXA is obviously something which has become somewhat of a wonder drug within the pre-hospital community, especially with hemorrhagic shock or bleeding control. And if you know what it is, then you're probably well versed in it. Chest seals being used as obviously something to hold in place and stuff. Look, I have heard of this being done. I've never done it personally. I've always used control wrap, which is an elasticated bandage to hold gauze in place, or even just random bandages in place, whatever else. That's another top tip there. Maybe you got one more again. Kind of fight through the supplies. No, okay, sweet. You got one there. Okay, there we go. So that's a Halo, was it, or a Sam or something?
the Halo ones. Yeah, I double back them on these guys, and to some people's dismay, I just use them for securing stuff mostly, less for tension pneumothorax injuries. Again, this isn't like for using pressure and like bleeding. This is not the answer. You need a control wrap. This is just to keep stuff in place while I get that wrap around. Or like IVs, securing cricothyroidotomy tubes, so like crikes, or even chest tubes if I don't have the suture in place yet. This is a kind of little, hey, hold this while I get the more secure version ready,
Yeah, no, definitely on you with that. And I think what this brings up is that no matter what you train with, or no matter what you're planning to use, make sure you train with it. You said before, look, what we're talking about when we're giving IO as well, just so the listeners understand what we're talking about there. IV is what typically is given in most kind of pre-hospital settings. You give fluids, etc. But when you don't have access, or if you can't get access for whatever reason, if the person has obviously very low blood pressure, then we look at drilling or shooting a needle into the sternum. So the fast gun, obviously, they were both sternum guns. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, the fast is a sternum. I think I actually have the one I used in this kit. I have a general kit here, which is kind of similar to what I actually used. Yeah, I do have it right here, so I'll just show people so they can get an actual visual of it. So the one I use is a Talon. The fast is a different system. They work on the same principle. So this is the securing needles. None of these actually supply any fluid, but this goes into the sternum. It's got 6 needles that really just hold it in place. It looks pretty nasty. And then after you do that, open this guy up here. So kind of how I set my IOs up. Again, how I set up is how I set up. You don't have to do it, but I just do the TXA in there with a 10 cc syringe. On the tape, and then I just keep all the pieces I need for that in there. And then this is the actual needle itself that goes through the center of that portion directly into the hollow space of that bone.
What gauge is that one? Is that 10 or is it small, larger?
This one is, I want to say it's about a 10 or a 12 at least.
Gotcha. So just give the viewers at home an idea of what's actually happening here. Is you're giving fluids by punching through the bone itself into the marrow, and it obviously then transfers through into circulation. So that's kind of what we're dealing with there. So yeah, pretty heavy stuff. Obviously, different sternum gun to what you're using, and I think that comes down to, again, we chatted about this earlier. Pre-mission checks. If you are working with a different organization, if you are working with a different team, or even a different medic, make sure you go through. Don't pay lip service to it. A soldier's 5 or sitting there, just chatting about it is not good enough. We've got to go through, and make sure the gear is either aligned, or we know how to go through and use, whatever the other person is using. Because this comes down to inter-service operability or inter-team operability. If we don't, then obviously it just causes problems. So, no dramas. We got the IO in anyway, and so you've got your 18 Delta. For those of you who don't understand what that is, that's Special Forces medic, Green Beret. I'm assuming with that.
Yep.
Yeah. So Army Special Forces or Green Beret medic goes through, and you ask him to go through and check over the wound packing job, correct?
Correct.
All right, so let's launch from there, man. So what's going on with the wound pack?
Yeah, so we've gone through a majority of March, right? We just finished circulation. At this point, we call the locals, because they have, in that part of the world, blankets everywhere. So we just go, rent a few blankets from the compound we were in, and just wrap them in that. We have a heating element we take out from they call it the HPMK. It's the North American Rescue Hypothermia Management Kit. It's awesome, but we just had the essentially their wool blankets, and then brought that and then put that on top of them to kind of keep whatever residual is left, because there's the higher rates of survival is the sooner you can actually manage that core temperature. So that we finished March out, and then at that point blood was starting to flow through. So pretty good algorithm. The pain came in with the TXA just because it happened to be right there. And at that point, he needed another dose of ketamine, but since there was blood flowing through it, we had to do IM. So did 20 more milligrams IM intramuscular, so that stands for. So it's going in the muscle instead of in the vein. And then what was the med evac time? Yeah,
Yep.
so
we'll
the med evac time.
Sorry, bro.
Yeah, sorry.
Jump onto these questions in just a second. Keep them coming, guys. We'll just get through the segment just so we've got the flow of things. We'll address these in a second, and they are great questions, so please keep them coming. But yeah, we've gone through, and you're obviously delivering the drugs, getting this person turned into a human puddle, which is definitely the best way to have them when they're instead of whatever else. Okay, so going through, you've gotten through your march, or getting through your march, obviously addressing the aspect of hypothermia, which is just so important. Can't talk enough about that. But where are we now? So we've gone through, we've addressed that. We're now working on the hypothermia. Now where are we at?
Yep, so we're supposed to go into the pause section, which is pain, antibiotics, wounds, and splinting. But since this guy still had an uncontrolled hemorrhage in that wound cavity, we can't skip to that. So we would go back to M. We restart our march, essentially. I had the 18 Delta. I had him start passing up the injuries to our team leader so we could kind of work what we're going to do with that. We knew we weren't going to get extract immediately because we're still in that troops in contact. So at that point, I was like, all right, I'm going to take a look at this bleeder because it's now the third time or second time it's been packed. So I take a little peek underneath the ace wrap, and lo and behold, it is soaked through the gauze, and it was fresh gauze. It wasn't reused gauze. That's an important note. So the fresh gauze has been soaked through. It's the outermost one, so it's got to soak through all of those gauze that were shoved in that cavity. So there's still uncontrolled bleeding. So at that point, I had recalled from our deployment spin up. I worked with a really good doctor. It's just all of this success really just comes from enough people giving a shit, is what I call it, and it's kind of awesome when that happens. It's like people who trained me, and then everyone on this objective essentially had people that cared. So I had been doing a deployment spin up. We had a pretty intense one, and we had live tissue labs to work with. Just long story short, just bleeders you can actually work with, and one of them was very similar wound profile to what this one was. Not exactly the same, but we couldn't control this bleed, and I'm working with this doctor, and we're kind of getting frustrated. He looks at me, he's like, hey, Ben, if you can't control it, they're going to die, so you might as well just open it up. And I was like, oh, I've never been told that. So he had me take a scalpel. That's why I carry a scalpel right in my chest area all times now, and just opened it up and then packed in that training. So I just had that kind of recall when looking at this patient, because I was starting to get that frustration moment, where you're like, man, it's hard. I'm trying to do everything, and I want to stop this bleed. I'm getting a little frustrated with it. So, I just looked at 18 Delta. I was like, hey, I'm just going to cut this thing open. And he's like, yeah, dude, go for it. So just took my scalpel, went along the lateral side of the leg, and just cut that thing down until it was about 6 inches, I'd say, give or take, opened up. And now I could actually fit my whole hand into that cavity. So I removed all the gauze again. This time I put my hand all the way in, and I got it to I'd say right about the wrist into that wound cavity before I actually found the source of the bleeding, which is right up high, right against that pelvic area.
I mean, that's just that. Obviously, this is where things get kind of heavy with it. And this is something when I was sitting there reading the kind of brief AAR on this, I obviously didn't realize it was you who had done this, but I was sitting there reading about it, and honestly, this is something which had kind of floated through my mind. Many times, had some, bloody close calls and near misses and stuff like that, and thinking, hey, I've done a lot of shooting, a lot of hunting, been exposed to a lot of gunshot wounds, and I always thought, how am I going to address that? Never been trained in that. So I think, massive props to the doc who was obviously working with you, going through and, obviously, just seeing that, in a training environment gives you that confidence, because, I mean, that's no joke. And I bet the local national was so stoked, that he'd been given that pop anyway, sitting there sucking on that thing, at least, at very minimum, at least it's better than just hey, you have some Panadol, change your socks and we'll go. I'm going to cut you open, bro. So
that man had a lot of pain, man.
Yeah, that's incredible. 6-inch incision, obviously, so you could get your hand in there. And I just want to talk about that real quick. One of the things that I've noticed with people, we obviously teach people how to go through and identify bleeds. If you can't see it from an external perspective, earlier in the cast, we obviously went through and we talked about, dabbing the gauze in, using your fingers to scoop it out. one of our other people who's working with us, he brought one up a while ago, literally using positioning to get a little bit of the blood out if there is, a really large cavity you can't see inside, using that. These are all things that you can obviously do to visually see it. But if you can't physically see it, if you can't see where the big bleed's coming from, putting your fingers in and searching along, and you've got to be very methodical about that too. If you go through and just kind of flusting around the place, pushing your fingers around inside of a wound channel or a cavity, then you're never going to find it because you're just frantically kind of just guessing. So we did talk about it before. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say. Hey, we did talk about it before. But Ben had an excellent. I didn't make this up, by the way, just so the viewers know. But basically, there was a saying. Yeah, it's happening. We had a saying earlier that we were talking about, and it was BBC. And so for those of you out there who are kind of thinking, "Oh my God, what's he about to rattle off?" It's not probably what some of you are thinking about. BBC stands for "Bitch Be Calm," and I think this is such an important thing. BBC, I'm going to steal that because going through slowly, methodically, systematically checking, obviously, inside of that wound cavity to find that massive bleed is so important. Without that, as we kind of mentioned before, it doesn't matter what hemostatic you're using, what fairy dust, impregnated or not impregnated gauze you're using. If you don't find that bleed, if your technique is not sound, you are doomed. You're never going to get hemostasis. So, massive. Okay, so let's just address a couple of these questions real quick. We're kind of jumping back a little bit here, but we'll go to, I'll just bring this up on the screen here. What we'll do is we'll go through and we'll talk about Max Karma's question. Why are sternal IOs used instead of alternate locations, i.e. the tibial, femoral, humeral, etc.? And so, from my perspective, it is all about obviously getting fluids in quickly. And in particular, when it comes to going through and delivering that, you got to remember that the more distal we go, the less circulation. It's never going to be as effective as going, sternal, which is pretty much directly across the top of the heart. What's your thoughts on that, Benji?
Yeah, so I considered doing not the tibial just because the one leg is you got a tourniquet on it, so I'm not going to, IO the one with the tourniquet on it. The other one, I wasn't really sure. I don't even carry the tibial length needle for that one because it's so short. I carry a sternal. I carry a little washer that sizes it to the size for freezing the humeral head, so you can get away with it. I would suggest just carrying the proper size needle, but at the time in theater we only had that needle, so that's what I was using. And I prefer the sternal, just especially for like combat related injuries. We're all of us wearing body armor, so that sternum is going to be nice and protected. And if the sternum is destroyed, more than likely your patient is expired anyway. At the, not 100%, but generally, if that sternum is gone, like, man, they need more than just an IO at that point. So it's always a kind of an option. The humeral head, I don't love doing a whole lot because you have to get the positioning just right. And a lot of people, this guy was actually a pretty in shape local national, to be honest. I think that's why he did survive and was able to compensate for that time. But even like, when you're treating Americans, they're a bunch of meat eaters. So they have overbuilt chest and shoulders. So you have to get through all that tissue. It's not always a guarantee. And those things pop out a lot easier. I think they're a lot harder to secure.
100%, especially with limb movement and stuff like that. Any intervention or any placement that you do, that limb needs to be secured, whether it's from a bleeding perspective, to prevent rebleeding, anything around the shoulder is, just a bit of a nightmare. So hopefully that addresses the question. And Max, fantastic question as well. Really, really good. We'll just have a look at the next one. And that is, of course, going to be from Paul again. What was your medevac time for this op? So I guess this is probably something we'll talk about a little bit later down the line. But obviously you were one of the medics on the ground. You've got an 18 Delta with you. That's very, very med heavy. Going through, especially for a DA patrol or a DA mission or whatever else, having two guys with such amazing talents or skill sets within a DA team is pretty awesome. What were we looking at? How far was the nearest FST or life support camp or whatever you guys were working back to? What was the next level of care?
Yeah, it was, so The medevac time on this one was a little extended just because of the troops in contact, and it wasn't an American that was hit, so we're not going to risk an American bird necessarily. We did create a new HLZ to get this patient once we had there were still more combatants on another wash, but the ones in the relative vicinity we had taken care of at that point. It had probably been about 40 minutes before we could get a bird in there. So it was about 40 minutes with this guy, and the flight time to the nearest treatment facility was about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, depending.
Okay. I mean, that's, I saw an article come out kind of semi-recently, and I think it was Trauma Daddy, aka Dr. Andrew Fisher, who put it up. And it was kind of, it was a misleading article about the efficacy of whole bloods on scene and on site. And I mean, there is no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt about the efficacy of whole bloods, but it has to be, relatively urgent. And I mean, some of the products which are coming out now, you've mentioned them before. You've got North American Rescue there. They do the warming, that tiny little warming package as well. And that's really quite a critical point as well, warm fluids going in. But also the boys over at Crow Medical, they're coming up with some just incredible stuff in terms of their specific kind of whole blood program, specific kits and stuff. And their gear is just amazing. So if you don't follow Trauma Daddy, make sure you go over and do. I'll put a link through to his stuff after this. And also Crow Medical, for those of you who are working, particularly medics, special operations people and stuff like that. If you don't already, then go and follow Crow Medical. Jeff and his team are just working on some insane stuff. So definitely do that. They're amazing. And the last one there again from Paul is HPMK brilliant. It's a comment. I generally agree with that. But what you need to remember is that we need to have stuff going on underneath. And that's probably one of the big aspects of one of the big kind of points of failure is not addressing, obviously, the energy transfer from the patient through into the ground. That's a massive problem. So if you are using HPMK, blizzard survival systems, whatever else, make sure you address that. There is other products out there, Kingfisher or TSG Kingfisher is one which is just absolutely incredible. More for the military people. This can be, basically it's all in one. You're dealing with hypothermia management, rapid access to anywhere in the body. You can kind of draw it up and down in terms of size for people who have, bilateral amputations of both legs blown off, etc. Just an absolutely fantastic system. So yeah, definitely have a look at them as well. So let's cut back. Thanks for the questions, guys. Keep them coming if you got them. We will address them as we go. So, okay, hand is inside of thigh now. Not your typical Friday night.
Not really.
Or Monday night or whatever, anywhere except for maybe Afghanistan during the height of things. But we're dealing with your hand is inside this guy. We've found the big bleed. We've gained access. We've sliced his leg open on the lateral aspect. And now we've found the massive bleed. That's good news.
Yeah.
Where are we at?
Yep. So at this point, I am out of hemostatic gauze, which again, like you stated, it's more so the technique than the gauze. So at that point, I just had standard Kerlix, which is fine. I was down to my last 4 rolls probably that were in my immediate treatment kit. I don't like treating on my ruck. I keep everything on my body. So I had some more backups in there if I really needed it. But this was the last bit on my body. I'd used, 18 deltas, and mine were kind of almost spent on gauze. The next 3 to 4 rolls that went in there were about 12 to 13 rolls total we had to use on this guy of gauze. So the last 3 kind of really methodically packed it in there. So I got it, I felt it with my fingers, passed the gauze over the top of my finger, and then pushed and replaced, held it in place. And just kind of did that until I built up a mound. I built a little mound up on it. And once I had that mound kind of controlling bleeding, it's looking in, it's not pooling still. Now that I have that good buildup, then I started packing around that gauze to make sure it stayed in place because there's still a little cavity behind it. So if I didn't go behind it and put gauze there, it's just going to roll off. So I basically 3D packed it and built that whole mound all the way out of the wound until I had the wound fully packed. And then I held pressure on that until we could get the ACE wrap on. But I held pressure on that directly, and then we wrapped it. 18 Delta helped me wrap that one up. And then that was the final time we truly had to pack that wound fully.
So hemostasis gained.
Yes, finally.
fucking awesome, man. I mean, that's just, it's incredible. There's a number of aspects in this which are just insane. First of all, the injury is insane, just for starters. Getting shot through there, the survival of the first 5 to 7 minutes, lying there, hosing out in a compound, just literally pissing your life away onto the ground. I can't imagine what must have been going through his head, especially realizing, geez, my mates have left me here. And then getting him out of the building, going through the initial wound pack, absolutely huge on that. And then realizing, oh, that's failed, and then reflecting and referring back to something that you've only done in training. And I mean, you can only do this in training, really. It's not like you get an opportunity to do this. And that's why I think this is so important to push this message out there, especially to those who are aspiring medics early in your career, even people later in their career and so on. Making that incision through so important. I don't think you're ever going to get the perfect scenario, with any kind of thing. And the more tools you can add to your toolbox is just so important. So that's huge. So, all right, we've now gained control. How's everything on the outside of the room, outside of Benji's board at this point? How are we doing?
So it's looking pretty good. Team leader had successfully neutralized all the threats at that point, well, the known threats, and we had the helo coming in. So at this point, he's already been on the litter. When we put him on the blanket, we put him on the litter, so it's kind of the one and done there. And now that we've controlled that bleeding, we're just kind of going through, rechecking every intervention we have. The blood is just finished up going in. We don't want to give him the second one because we're about to run into the bird, and also we don't want to use our other unit of blood because that's what if we still have to finish the op afterwards. So the Americans, we need to keep blood. So we're gonna we sprint to the helo, load them up. We do a good handoff. So at the time I was using a SIT report. So I've heard of MIST report, which is mechanism of injury, injuries, signs and symptoms of the injury, and then treatments. For us, we just do, is it stable or unstable? What were the injuries and what were the treatments? So that was kind of what I used to pass off the information with the patient treatment card that we had been annotating everything on after we controlled that bleed and had a few minutes to do it. We kind of worked on that together. Once we had that done, we ran to the helo and said, like, hey, he needs a unit of blood right now because I had a weak carotid at that point, nothing else. So he's starting to go down. So they hang blood. We take blood from them to replenish what we used. And then at that point, we continue the op, and he's flown away to the excellent surgeons that we have in theater at that point.
And I mean, that's absolutely massive as well. Handover, takeover in any kind of sense is just so important. Understanding what you're dealing with, obviously your buddy's coming through the dust off team or the, I don't know, I guess that's what you're dealing with.
Dust off at that point, yeah.
Yeah, so they come through and they just do such an amazing job between PJs and dust off. And I'm sure there's a lot of Kiwis out there as well, and other coalition, of course, who can thank you guys so much for what you do. Certainly from my aspect personally, just massive. So, yeah, huge job done there, and getting those guys in. We can only do so much on the X. We can only do so much, at that point in time. Getting into the next line of care. And then moving that patient, obviously he's very sick at this point. We need to get him off to, obviously, like you said, the cold steel and the hot white lights. Get him under operation and get him worked on. And I mean, some of the surgeons, many of the surgeons which are coming out of the GWOT theaters or the Global War on Terror theaters, and some of the, basically all of the, modern medicine which has come out of there has just made some absolutely incredible trauma surgeons. Everything. Microsurgery, all your vascular surgeons, neurosurgeons, all the rest of it, just amazing stuff which is coming out there. So, yeah, amazing. We've just got another question here as well. We'll just jump on top of this now. And then I've got another point I want to bring up. So Paul's asked here, do you carry RD clips or arterial clips? And for those who don't understand what that is, basically this is a clamp or a clip that you can use to go through. And if you do have an exposed artery, get access onto it and obviously pinch it closed. It's basically like a closed peg, but with a locking system. If you think Black Hawk Down, that's what they're attempting to do with a set of forceps, I think it was, or forceps, push them inside and obviously clamp off. Kind of similar injury if we kind of think about it, I guess. But so do you carry RD clips in terms of what you do?
I carry, I call it hemostats. Just I keep them right in the part of my kit. For that one, it was like a kind of a feel, not see thing. So I wasn't comfortable pulling those out. One thing I did consider is for the which I talked through with the 18 Delta, and looking back, we could have used it, but we weren't sure of pelvic involvement at that time. But we were considering a junctional tourniquet. We didn't have a proper one because we didn't have that resource at the time. I did have one that we'd made, which I'd seen from the Rangers, which is just a rolled up SAM splint. So it's a nice, this tight rolled up SAM splint, and you take a soft T wide and you go over around that, and then you can cinch it down onto the actual artery and stop it that way. But we had by the time we had started discussing it, we probably should have discussed it sooner, to be honest. But by the time we'd already controlled it. It was that third pack when I had cut it open and done that. So it was like, well, if it rebleeds, we're going to absolutely apply that. But at that point, we didn't need it. So something we should have considered a little sooner. But the reason we didn't go there immediately at the time with information we had was we thought there was pelvic involvement just because of that massive injury in there. So.
Yeah, right. And so you guys obviously didn't have anything prefab, so you're looking at using the soft T wide. I'm a huge fan, especially of the latest iteration of the tourniquet. The CAT is an amazing thing as well. And just on that as well, guys, if you are going to get a tourniquet, make sure it is COTC approved and recommended. The two that I sent for, obviously, big time on the TechMed Solutions soft T wide 5 or soft 5 as it's known. The North American Rescue Cat 7 is an amazing TQ as well. Absolutely incredible system. Saved a lot of lives. It's general issue a lot around here as well. So it's great TQ. But just be careful of those Wish.com and Alibaba kind of fakes. And obviously, straight away he's starting to spin up already, man. I do the same thing. As soon as somebody starts, it's straight up. Something which is sold as and designed to be a life-saving device, and we've got companies here in New Zealand who want to be high speed and want to be about this life, and they're really not. And they're selling these products to people who just don't know any better. So for the listeners out there, if you are wondering whether your TQ is legit or not, just send us through a photo. I'm not going to turn around and be like, no, it's fake. You're going to buy one from us straight away. Or anything like that. If you got a legit cat, whatever else, then I'll let you know straight away. These things are it's a buy once, cry once thing. If it's under New Zealand dollars here, if it's under about $55, $60, then it's probably not legit. Stateside, you can get them for about $20, $29, $30 or whatever it is.
Sometimes you can get a deal for like 25. The lowest I've ever seen them is like 22. But even then, I'd be like, is this real?
In a perfect world. So, man. I mean, just make sure we're on top of that. So, all right. So, outcome. Did our man make it through? He survived?
Yeah, so that was kind of dealing with the after effects, because the gravity of the situation at the moment, what it is, but it doesn't really hit you until, because you don't have time for that. So the helo ride back, I was just kind of sitting there and reflecting on every single intervention I did. So like, was that the right move? Did I do it? Got back, refit, rekit everything. It's probably like 4 a.m. now. Sun's starting to come up soon. And then washing the blood out of the uniform kind of thing. And then we get a call from the doc. And he's like, hey, he's stabilized. He's going to surgery right now to get reconstruction done, but he's going to make it. So that was really good to hear that we were able to do that. And just like a note, at the time, I wasn't probably mature enough to take this feedback the way it was intended, but they're going over like improvements. And one of them was, hey, like your IO was 2 millimeters to the right. And instead of being like, oh, it was 2 millimeters to the right, because that's just a fact. That's not he wasn't saying like you fucked it up or anything. He was like, there's 2 millimeters to the right. So I was like, okay. At the time I got a little, a butt hurt might be the word, upset. I was like, what does that guy know? I was in a tick, like it was dark. Like, of course it's 2 millimeters to the right. But what he was actually getting at was data. And that's good data to collect, is that thing was 2 millimeters to the right. And guess what? It still worked. So that's data that we can like actually use of like what is effective. So just, if you're a more junior medic, when someone gives you data, which isn't like a, opinion on what you've done, actually listen to that and think about it. Don't take it that way.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. The first is you're absolutely right. Check the ego at the door in any kind of sense. Sometimes that's a very, very hard thing to do, especially if you come back in from a really, really tough op. That's a bad night. That's a bad night to go through. I mean, it's worked out really well, but like you say, the sun does come up, and as you're starting to see that red stuff all through your cams and so on, it's all your fatigues, whatever. You're sitting there and you're like, wow, that was pretty heavy, coming down from the adrenaline buzz and all the rest of it. And, especially if you haven't been through the team and had a proper decompression or anything like that, gone around, done a hot wash, let alone even a cold wash at that point, it's a very, very heavy thing to go through. So I think, yes, that is part of it. But the other side is as well, for anybody out there, think about how you're delivering how you're delivering feedback to people, and I think this is quite important to go through and do. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know, what their evening has been like or anything like that. Obviously that was pretty heavy, and to go through and just go through some things can be misinterpreted or taken the wrong way. So how can we effectively go through and communicate that? Well, it's pretty easy, man. You go through and say, hey, first of all, awesome job. Second of all, let them know that the IO was slightly to the left or right or whatever it was, but it was still effective. That's absolutely amazing. Good job on that, and I think that is just such an important thing because, we can learn from this stuff, whether it's a good point or a bad point. Now, I just want to talk real quick, or ask a question real quick. So you've used about 10,000 rolls of gauze at this point. When we're back, a little rewind. Now, obviously, the thing which instantly starts pinging off in my head is resub. Because we know the mission's not finished. Unless Ops has said, no, that's it, and called quits, and you guys are going to extract out of there, then we're still going to go through and get the job done. And it's not like, it's not like we're going to be sitting there kind of invincible or anything else like that. But we've got to go through and obviously have support. Did you get any other gauze from Dust Off or anything like that? Is there any process where you requested additional stores to be dropped off or anything?
So we requested more blood, but not gauze. Good AR point for there. Fortunately, I had packed about 4 more rolls in my ruck, so it was enough for about what I could conceivably do another casualty with. And then the 18 Delta said he had about 2 rolls left. So at that point, we had to actually just scrounge from our team because we had them kind of loaded up with a bunch of med supplies, gauze everywhere. So that's kind of like people say, a medic's job is to carry the more, advanced stuff. And that's absolutely true. Like advanced airways, advanced, access, everything. But at the same time, you also need to remember to plus up where you can, the most used supplies. And I think for me on that one, it was absolutely gauze and bandages. If there's room in my ruck and it doesn't weigh anything anyway to add that stuff, I just put more gauze and bandages in now.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to seem like a bit of a plug, but for me, straight up, since coming into contact with the Elias bandage, that's, again, the TechMed Solutions one, I've gone through. My heart is very much set on stuff that I've used before, being trained in, very loyal to it and stuff. Oh, wow, look at that. Stop.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, man. So basically, it's a bandage which obviously provides a compression wrap as well as a small sheet of plastic which can be used for a whole bunch of different things. But it has actually, I think you guys call it standard Curlex. So obviously going through and making sure that they've got, gauze and type of bandage as well, which just feeds out. It feeds out perfectly. And I've never used one of these in the red or in a real-time situation, but in training I've used them, and man, the first thing I kind of thought was, far out, where were these, when I need them and stuff like that. We got introduced to those by an 18 Delta as well. He came through and goes, man, you should check this out. And initially I was like, oh yeah, whatever. And then he had a look at it in one way. So yeah, there it is. Massive, absolutely massive. So patient gets through. Patient obviously is going to get a new head on his femur. Titanium man running around out there doing his thing. So yeah, all right. We've gotten that under control. Everything's done, and then go through and obviously have that debrief. That's pretty massive. So all in all, man, I mean that's a bloody good result as far as I'm concerned, man. Absolutely amazing, and certainly out of the norm. I mean, how many people out there have dealt with a injury profile like this successfully? I don't know anybody personally, except for yourself. So I think that's just a huge kind of lesson learned there. What do you think in terms of chances of survival if he hadn't had yourself and the 18 and the Delta sitting on top of him? What do you reckon his chance of survival was with even the rest of the DA team and his Afghan national buddies?
I mean, not toot our own horn, but not really good because we barely kept that guy from going over. His weak carotid at the end, even with blood going on board. So without the blood, I don't think he would have made it because, like I said, he was decompensating to the point where his heart rate was starting to go back down from the 120s, starting to drop below 100. There is some sedation on board, but not enough to be really doing that. So it's really just a hypovolemic shock issue at that point because no brachial, just a weak carotid at the end when the bird landed and he was getting his second unit of blood on that bird.
Yeah, massive, and I think that's just so important as well. I don't understand why this thing hasn't been a thing, especially within certain communities here in New Zealand. Whole bloods is where it's at, in terms of getting them on board early in the piece. In terms of survivability, it's undeniable the efficacy of that. So again, Paul, we've got a couple of questions here. And I totally agree. It's so important to debrief each op, quality, learning, and reflection for sure. We've got a question here. Do each troops carry an IFAC? And I'm just going to talk about this real quick. So this has been something of a bit of a topic of discussion recently, Paul, within kind of the social media circles and so on and so forth. This is probably one of the first things I look at when I'm working with, a client, a customer. Doesn't matter whether it's military, police, or otherwise. What is the location and position of your IFAC? 100%. If you're not carrying one, well, you should be. I'm not going to be derogatory of anybody without it. Every single person should be carrying an IFAC. It doesn't matter whether it's training, doesn't matter whether it's live operations, workup, as you guys call it, or pre-deployment for us. These things, injuries happen anytime. So positioning of that is so important. The mirroring of IFACs. It needs to be an instinctive drill. You cannot go through and be like, oh yeah, go searching for it. If someone's hiding it under their left arm or whatever else, that's just going to be worthless. If everybody else has got it in their, in their fanny pack or dangler or whatever else, and positioning of TQ. So, were all the Afghan local nationals that you're working with? I'm guessing it's probably the SF Afghan boys. Were they carrying IFACs as well that you guys provided, or were they just kind of winging it?
They're kind of winging it at that point, to be honest. So all the Americans had IFACs. The team had brought out the under the plates ones, so we just did the long tape tail on that with your blood type, and then that was on each individual American's IFAC, and that was we did cover that in the familiarization portion of where to put it. So the Afghans didn't have, not everyone had an IFAC. I did a quick look. He just had some ancient looking body armor, no real pouches on it. So
yeah, and that was fairly typical, of any of the kind of local national forces I worked as well. They didn't really have that education, especially in the ME and so on and so forth. It was essentially insular was your IFAC. So yeah, that debatable results with that, but honestly, everybody needs to carry these things. So I think you brought it up before, Ben. Massive point. The medic isn't carrying. He's not carrying TQ for you. He's not carrying gauze and friggin' Elias for you or emergency manage, Izzy, whatever you want to call it for you. He's carrying stuff supplementary, so he can work at his level of care, at a higher level of care. When you get hit, when you get hurt, he's blowing your IFAC on you. That's it. So make sure you're carrying it. If there's any of the military kind of community or police listeners out there listening to this, go through on your next shift, on your next opportunity, and check your guys' stuff. If you're in a job, especially a shooter job, you should be as well versed with medicine as you are squeezing the trigger, because bullets go both ways. We know this, okay? So make sure your med stuff is 100% squared away. I can't get on top of that enough. Have the cause and effect over one thing that you can, and that, of course, is survivability. You don't get to win every time, and that's an unfortunate truth. We know this, especially in New Zealand. August, incredibly difficult month for the military community in particular. coming up on the 10-year anniversary of a really, really dark month for us. So let's not forget what happened. Let's not forget the lessons learned. Let's not forget these incidents. If we turn around and try and forget the stuff, then, we're only doomed to repeat it. So let's stay on top. But yeah, pretty crazy. We've just got one other question here as well. For you guys, I'm guessing you're probably using gravity fed at this point. But from Paul, pressure bag for blood or gravity fed when you're going through in that initial blood transfusion?
Yeah, that transfusion was a gravity fed one.
Yeah, easy. Okay, and was the TQ effective, or just provide some support or no support? So I think what we need to remember here is that we've got entrance exit. Initially, obviously, where the big bleed is coming from is going to be, in your instance here, was witnessed from the entrance wound. So gunshot wounds, entrance exit, obviously you're dealing with two different kind of wounding profiles, permanent and temporary cavitation within the actual leg itself in this instance. So as soon as you secured the TQ and secured that entrance wound, and that's when it started bleeding from the exit wound, yeah?
Yeah.
Blood will always find a way. So again, that's why it's so important. It doesn't matter how many times you do it, team. Go through and check and recheck. Do your blood sweeps. Just get on top of it. You cannot do that enough times. And if there is an ounce of doubt, there is no doubt. You've got to go through and just go through and redress or readdress things as you kind of go. So, that's absolutely incredible. What an AAR. That's just nothing. That whole experience. And you did talk about it earlier. You didn't want much of a shout out with it, but obviously you did receive some sort of citation awards for that. I'm not going to kind of embarrass you, make you rattle it off or anything like that, but I think that's well worthy, man. And what you've gone through and done with that is just it's amazing. And thank you so much for your ability to go through and speak on that. We were going to cover chain of survival and care. I think we have to leave that for another day because we're already over the 1 hour mark.
Oh, wow. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
When you're having a good time, man, it's out there. Man, is there anything, any closing thoughts, anything you want to go through, anything which really sticks out in terms of lessons learned, or anything, top tips for young players out there?
Yeah, if you're kind of doubting your skills, it's kind of like with firearms. Like, you always have that, like, man, I should have done some more practice. I just don't, I'm not where I want to be. Same thing with medicine. Like, any chance you can get to go even do some practice, whether it be, going through your kit and figuring out where everything is at and how you like to place it and pulling it out and actually, hey, I need a supply right now. I'm going to use that. Or it be like, hey, I'm going to go to my, med team. Like, hey, can we set up some like live bleeding training of some sort? If your organization doesn't have it, go ahead. We have plenty of suggestions on what to use for that. But, practicing those basics and really working with people at a higher level than you is going to set you up for success. So if you have a doc, again, there's a difference between clinical and field knowledge. A lot of docs, not all, a lot of them have really good field knowledge, but, a lot of them are more clinical based, and even they have a lot to offer you guys. Learn from them, because like that trick I learned from was technically from a family care doc who was interested in trauma, and he'd done a lot of research on his own work. So like, that's impressive. And he was, the reason we were able to do that. So, surrounding yourself with people that are outside of your normal skill set, and learning from them and training with them as much as possible is, I think, invaluable. Whether it be, other medics from other organizations, whether it be a flight medic, even, critical care nurses. Some of the best patient care stuff I've learned has been from cardiac ICU nurses. So this varying your skill set is only going to help you.
Yeah, no, look, I totally echo that, and obviously promote that to the max as well. We're working very, very closely with some additional kind of external resource from our company perspective as well. And that's only for exactly the same reason, to make sure that we get people through. And ultimately, it's the name of the game, is raising the standards, raising the skill sets, and just providing what we have learned, what works, what doesn't, and of course, centric around the base model of evidence-based medicine is just so important. So, yeah, no, that's absolutely huge, man. That's massive, brother. It has been a wild ride for the last hour or so. Thank you so much for coming on board. joining us. I think we have to run it back and cover off some other bits and pieces which have popped out through there as well. Just to let the listeners know who are still with us out there, our next live after action review is going to be on the 22nd of September. A little bit more warning with this one, just because the schedule was a little easier to lock in. Ben's been running around the place. He's still running around, kicking ass and taking names. So obviously it's a little hard to lock him in. So sorry about the short notice, team. But yeah, the next one is going to be focusing on a paramedic's perspective from working frontline in South America. So that's going to be a really, really interesting kind of watch as well. Again, before we wrap up today, and for the viewers over stateside, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the questions. Paul in particular, rock star today.
Yeah, I love the curiosity.
Yeah, full blown. And it's awesome, asking questions. We'll never, ever go through, obviously, criticize, mock, or belittle people for asking questions. I think that's so important. I'm a massive fan of it, and it only makes people better at what they do. So thank you so much. But Ben, from us over here in NZ to any listeners in the States, thank you so much. You all better go and head across now to Instagram, jump on Greenfeet Medical. How else can we kind of follow you? Do you have any other channels or anything like that you kind of run, bro?
I have a YouTube channel. I just repost everything from Instagram there. I don't really interact on that one a whole lot. So if you want to get interaction, the Instagram is the big one right now. That's about all my social media bandwidth can handle without hiring someone at this point. Then the website should be going live in the next month or so, just kind of waiting on the last bit of supplies because I don't want it to go live with nothing to offer anyone. So yeah, greenfeetmedical.com is that one, and Instagram Greenfeet Medical. That's all I'd ask for now.
Yeah, epic. And if you want one of those sweet T-shirts that you're wearing, Ben, how do we go about and get one of those? Are you guys still doing those at the moment?
Yeah, I have them. Right now, I am sponsoring a meme tournament, so the link to the shirts isn't there right now, and I'm going to transition those shirts to the website instead of the third party I have. So if you want to wait, if you want them right now, just send me a direct message. You can still get them, and I'll send you the link for it. But it's gfm.red, the number 7tees.com. We can post that one up. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's where it's at right now, but it'll be moving to greenfeetmedical.com soon.
And I'm pretty sure you got that link in your bio anyway or something like that. And if you don't, whatever, Tay, just wait until he gets his website live. That's kick-ass, bro. Yeah, again, thank you so much. And yeah, there's a bunch of different links we'll put up to people that I think both of us do follow within the community. If you guys have any questions regarding this or anything else, feel free to fire them through. We'll do our best to answer them as best as we can. And if we get too many questions, I'll just say, hey, BBC, we're going to have to run it back.
Yeah.
But Ben, thank you so much to the listeners, viewers. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, just remember, trauma sleeps no one out there, team. Semper Paratus, always ready. We'll see you on the flip anyway. Again, Ben, thank you. You've done amazing things. Continue to do an amazing thing. Thank you for your service. Cheers, bye.
Appreciate it.